It was an unassuming afternoon in Washington, D.C. The hum of the city seemed to soften as the sun began its slow descent, casting golden hues over the nation's capital. Inside a sleek, upscale hotel lounge, tucked away in the heart of the city, Barron Trump sat by the window. A tall, lean figure, his face calm and unreadable as his dark eyes scanned the bustling streets below. Despite his well-known last name, Barron had always kept a low profile, staying out of the public eye, choosing silence over spectacle. But today was different. Today, fate had a twist in store. As the sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations filled the background, Barron's attention was drawn to an unsettling scene outside the window. A homeless veteran, worn and weathered by years of hardship, sat on the sidewalk not far from the entrance. His clothes were ragged, and a cardboard sign bearing a simple request for help lay next to him. But it wasn't just the sight of a struggling man that captured Barron's gaze. It was the sudden rise in voices, sharp, mocking, and hostile. A group of young men approached the veteran, laughing loudly. Their voices cut through the otherwise peaceful air, a clear contrast to the dignity that seemed to emanate from the old man's frail form. The situation escalated quickly, with one of the young men shoving the veteran's sign away, mocking him loudly. The others laughed. The veteran stood to defend himself, but the taunts only grew more vicious, more aggressive. Barron's heart raced as the harassment continued. He had seen enough of the world's darker sides in his own way, but something about this felt different. The injustice in the air was palpable. But it wasn't just the cruelty of the moment that stood out, it was Barron's response to it. What he did next would send shockwaves through the crowd, leaving everyone in the lounge speechless. At that moment, Barron didn't hesitate. He didn't retreat into the shadows, nor did he turn away. Instead, he stood up slowly, his tall frame rising above the chaos like a figure of quiet resolve. And what happened next was something no one could have predicted. A young man with a reputation for always staying out of the limelight was about to make a decision that would shake the very foundation of those who witnessed it. The question on everyone's mind: would Barron Trump stand by and watch the world unfold in the same old way? Or would he prove that there was more to him than just a last name? The moment Barron rose from his seat, the noise in the lounge seemed to evaporate. Conversation stuttered, eyes turned, and a sense of anticipation hung in the air as the young man, who had often remained out of the public spotlight, moved with quiet confidence towards the door. His tall, imposing figure cut through the crowd like a quiet storm. Most people in the lounge recognized Barron, of course. The son of Donald Trump, the president. But even those who knew his name couldn't help but wonder, what would Barron do? Outside, the situation was growing more tense by the second. The group of young men had surrounded the veteran now, their laughter cutting through the air like jagged shards. One of them shoved the veteran's sign even further down, while another snatched the man's hat from his head and tossed it aside. The others continued to mock him, making cruel remarks about his age, his appearance, and his circumstances. Barron's eyes narrowed as he reached the door. He didn't look back. There was no need to. The moment was no longer about spectacle. It was about something deeper, something that demanded a response. The cool afternoon air hit him as he stepped outside. He paused for a moment, surveying the scene, before his gaze settled firmly on the group of young men who were now bullying the veteran. "Hey!" Barron's voice rang out with surprising authority, louder than anyone could have expected. The group froze, turning toward him. His tone was steady, calm, but there was something in it, something that made the young men hesitate. "What do you think you're doing?" Barron continued, taking a step forward. The group looked taken aback by the interruption. One of the young men, clearly the leader, sneered and took a step toward Barron. He was taller than Barron, a brash and confident sort of guy, someone who didn't shy away from confrontation. "You got a problem, man," the leader spat, his eyes narrowing. His friends laughed, thinking Barron might back down. After all, he was just a teenager. The son of a president, yes, but what could he possibly know about the struggles of the common man? Barron, however, stood his ground. He didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, he took a deep breath and stepped even closer. "I think you're a coward," he said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment, shocking everyone. The leader looked momentarily stunned, as though he didn't expect a response like that. "Excuse me." The leader's voice was raised, his confidence faltering. He glanced at his friends, but they, too, were uncertain now. They had expected Barron to back down, to be intimidated by their numbers. But Barron's calmness was unsettling. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no hint of entitlement. There was just quiet resolve. The veteran, who had been silently watching the exchange, seemed to sense the shift. His posture relaxed ever so slightly, as if he could see that something was about to change. He had lived a long, difficult life, full of moments when he had to fight for his dignity, but even he could not have predicted what would unfold before him. "What do you know about anything?" the leader asked, trying to recover from the unexpected confrontation. "You don't know what it's like to be out here, struggling like we are." Barron's expression didn't change. He simply looked at the young man, his eyes unwavering. "You're right. I don't know exactly what it's like. But I do know that dignity is something everyone deserves. That's why you're wrong to treat this man like this. No one deserves to be treated this way. Not anyone." The words were simple but potent, like an anchor in the storm. The group of young men fell silent, their defiance beginning to erode. Barron wasn't lecturing them, wasn't trying to be a savior or hero. He was speaking with clarity, with a quiet strength that seemed to resonate with the humanity of the moment. One of the young men, perhaps feeling uncomfortable or guilty, took a small step back. The leader, now visibly shaken by Barron's response, paused for a moment. There was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Perhaps for the first time, he wasn't sure of himself. Barron didn't wait for their apology. He didn't need one. Instead, he turned his attention back to the veteran, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines. Without saying a word, Barron knelt down, offering a hand to help the man to his feet. "You all right?" Barron asked softly. The veteran looked up at him, his weathered face breaking into a faint smile. For a brief moment, there was no judgment, no cruelty, just a quiet acknowledgement between two people who understood each other without needing to say much. Yeah, I'm good," the veteran replied, his voice gruff but appreciative. He took Barron's hand, and with a surprising amount of strength, pulled himself to his feet. The young men stood in stunned silence as Barron turned and began to walk with the veteran toward the sidewalk, his steps unhurried. For a moment, it felt like the world had slowed down. The leader of the group seemed at a loss, unsure of what to do next. His friends, once eager to join in the ridicule, had fallen silent. It was clear that Barron had done something unexpected, not just by confronting them, but by doing so with a calm, almost quiet dignity that none of them could have anticipated. As Barron and the veteran walked away, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate, replaced by an uneasy quiet. The young men had been given a choice, to continue down a path of cruelty or to reflect on what they had just witnessed. Barron had made sure they knew the difference between the two, and for the first time, perhaps they would never see the world the same way again. The streets were still, almost eerily quiet, as Barron and the veteran walked away from the confrontation. The soft shuffle of their footsteps was the only sound breaking the silence that had fallen over the group of young men. The sun, now dipping below the horizon, cast long shadows across the sidewalk as if mirroring the weight of the moment. Barron's mind was focused on the veteran beside him, who seemed to move with a newfound steadiness, as if a burden had been lifted. But as they walked, the silence in the air began to stir once again, and a sense of urgency seemed to rise from the young men still standing behind them. "Hey!" The voice was loud, harsh, and it shattered the calm. The leader of the group had broken from the huddle, his bravado reignited, and he was rushing toward Barron and the veteran. His friends, hesitating at first, quickly followed in his wake, drawn by a mix of confusion and resentment. Barron didn't turn around immediately. He knew the inevitable was coming, but he remained calm, unflinching. The veteran beside him, who had been quietly moving along, paused and looked over his shoulder at the group. His expression was hardening, like a man who had seen enough in his life to know when trouble was brewing. The leader caught up, his chest rising and falling with pent-up anger. "What the hell is your problem, man?" he spat, his voice cracking with frustration. "You think you can just walk away like that? Like you're better than us? You think you can just shame us and walk off like it doesn't matter?" Barron's gaze remained steady. He could feel the temperature rising, the tension tightening in the air. But instead of responding in anger, he let the question hang for a moment. He looked at the leader of the group, who now stood less than 5 feet away, his fists clenched at his sides. "I didn't shame you," Barron said quietly. His words were calm, almost too calm, given the circumstances. "You did that to yourselves. I just gave you the chance to see it." The leader's face flushed red. He looked around at his friends, searching for validation. They were standing in a loose semicircle behind him, their faces a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. The group wasn't used to being questioned like this, to being made to face their actions with such clarity. The leader's fists tightened even more. "You think you're so much better than us, huh?" the leader said through gritted teeth. "You don't get to lecture us. You don't know what it's like. You think you're above all this, above us? Just because you've got money and privilege." Barron took a slow, steady step forward. He wasn't threatening, but his presence was undeniable. "I don't think I'm better than you. I just think I have enough respect for myself to not treat people this way," he said. His voice was still soft, but there was an edge to it now, a firmness that had been lacking before. The leader's eyes widened, and he took a step back, his bravado faltering. He didn't expect this response. He thought Barron would be intimidated, maybe defensive. But instead, Barron was standing there with quiet, unwavering confidence. The veteran, still at Barron's side, seemed to sense the shift in the leader's posture. His eyes flicked between the two, and there was a silent understanding between them. The leader took another step back, his confidence draining from him like air from a balloon. "Whatever," he muttered, turning away. "This isn't over." But there was no fire in his voice now, only the bitter taste of defeat. As the group of young men started to disperse, Barron turned back to the veteran. His calm demeanor remained unbroken, but beneath the surface, something in his chest was tightening. He knew that what had just happened was more than a single confrontation. It was a turning point. The world around them seemed to stand still, suspended in the aftermath of the moment. The veteran, still standing tall despite his age, looked over at Barron. "You did good, kid," he said gruffly, his voice rough but laced with appreciation. "I've seen a lot in my day, and I can tell you, what you did there. That's something. You don't see that every day." Barron gave a small nod, his eyes softening for the first time since the confrontation had begun. "I just did what was right," he said simply. There was no arrogance in his voice, no grandiose sense of victory. He had done what he felt needed to be done, no more and no less. And in that quiet action, in that silent stand for dignity, he had already proven something far greater than any words could ever convey. As they continued down the street, the weight of the moment began to sink in for Barron. He had faced the harshness of the world, a world that seemed all too eager to bring people down, to tear them apart. But in that moment, he had chosen to stand firm, to choose the side of empathy over cruelty, compassion over disdain. And though the young men might never fully understand the lesson Barron had tried to impart, there was a part of Barron that knew. He had done something that would linger long after this day. The veteran glanced up at him, then down the road ahead. "You've got a good heart, kid," he said, his tone softening further. "Don't ever let this world change that." Barron didn't respond. He simply kept walking, side by side with the veteran, knowing that the impact of what had just happened wasn't about what was said, it was about what had been done. It wasn't just about the words he had spoken, but the stand he had taken. And it was in that silence, in that quiet moment of connection, that the true meaning of what had happened began to take root. As the last of the young men disappeared around the corner, Barron glanced back toward the hotel, the echoes of their confrontation still lingering in the air. There was no grand celebration, no applause. Only a sense of quiet resolve, of having done the right thing when it mattered most. And in that quiet, Barron knew that sometimes, action spoke louder than words. The evening sun sank lower, casting its warm glow on the quiet street, yet Barron's thoughts were heavy with the realization that a single act of kindness, of standing up for what was right, could change the course of someone's day, or even their life. As Barron walked beside the veteran, the city around them buzzed with its usual energy, unaware of the silent but powerful moment that had just unfolded. But Barron wasn't focused on the world around him. He was reflecting on what had just happened, on how simple yet profound his actions had been. The streetlights flickered on, their soft glow contrasting with the intensity of the confrontation just moments before. Barron had witnessed firsthand how easy it was for people to fall into a pattern of cruelty, to belittle others in an attempt to make themselves feel stronger, superior. But in that moment, when faced with aggression, Barron chose to stand firm, not with force, not with anger, but with a quiet, resolute conviction. He had refused to meet disrespect with more disrespect. Instead, he had calmly shown that true strength lies not in tearing others down, but in lifting them up. As he continued walking with the veteran, Barron's mind replayed the leader's words, the defiance in his voice. "You think you're better than us," he had said. Barron had not answered with a defensive stance or a retort. Instead, he had let the truth stand for itself. He had nothing to prove. He didn't need to be better than anyone else, only to be true to himself. And as they walked, Barron understood that the real message wasn't about winning a confrontation, it was about the courage to do what was right, even when no one was watching. It was about recognizing the humanity in every person, even those who may not show it at first glance. The leader of the group may have been filled with resentment and anger, but Barron saw past that. He saw a person who needed to be shown compassion and humility, someone who needed to be reminded of their own dignity. In that brief moment of tension, Barron had offered that reminder. And in doing so, he had won something far greater than a fleeting victory. As the veteran spoke again, his words were full of gratitude and admiration. "You did good, kid." Simple words, but for Barron, they resonated deeply. In a world that often celebrated loud, brash victories, Barron had learned that the quietest acts of bravery could be the most powerful. In the face of cruelty, he had chosen compassion. In the face of disrespect, he had chosen respect. But the lesson didn't stop there. Barron understood now, more than ever, that his actions had the power to ripple outward, affecting the people around him, and perhaps even beyond that. It wasn't just about what had happened that evening, but about the message he carried forward, that standing up for others, especially when it's hard, especially when it requires self-restraint and dignity, is the highest form of courage. That no matter the circumstance, we all have a responsibility to do what's right, even if it's not the easiest path. As the veteran continued walking beside him, Barron knew he had already impacted this man's life, perhaps in ways he might never fully understand. But more importantly, Barron had also affected his own life. In this quiet, reflective moment, he had found something deeper than victory. He had found purpose. He had found that strength doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can ripple through the world in ways we'll never fully know. And so, as Barron walked on, side by side with a man who had seen far too much of the world's darkness, he knew that what had transpired was just one chapter in a much larger story. He had chosen to be the difference he wanted to see, to act from a place of integrity and empathy, and to leave the world a little better than he had found it. In that quiet moment, Barron found peace. The world, full of noise and conflict, could often drown out the whispers of goodness, but he had heard it. And, more importantly, he had answered it. For anyone who witnessed this, the message was clear. We are all capable of choosing compassion over cruelty, understanding over judgment, and respect over disrespect. Barron had shown the world, through his calm and steadfast actions, that we don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference. We just have to be willing to do what's right. And perhaps, in a world that can feel divided and tumultuous, it's the quiet strength of individuals like Barron that can change the course of a moment, and eventually, the course of the world.